Hey, good morning, everybody. Welcome back to Law and Legitimacy, where every day is a new day in this, as Candide once said, the best of all possible worlds. You'll, of course, recall the reference to Voltaire's piece, Candide.
We're quoting Candide this morning, huh?
Well, I don't know. Hey, look, I'm having one of those, oh my God, kind of mornings. Last night around 9 o'clock, news came in.
It's all for the best, right?
Right. I'm now a grandfather again. Grandchild number 5 arrives. So welcome to Wally, or Wallace, as his name is. And, you know, if you want to feel old, start watching your kids have kids. Got 5 on Earth now. A 6th is due any day now. So I have good news. I know what my kids were doing during the pandemic. Do you know what yours were doing? Hey, and speaking of the pandemic, what in the world, Mike, is going on at the Morris Brown College? And why have I never heard of this place before?
Well, let's see here. Let me get an article here on the screen to support our criticism.
While Mike does that, let me give you the teaser. Did you think we were done with the pandemic? You know, Alex Jones predicted earlier in the week that there was a plan for a new lockdown, a rollout for a new lockdown. And I was saying to folks, wait, hold your horses. Alex is a very bright guy. He knows how to read tea leaves. He draws inferences, and sometimes he's right, sometimes he's wrong. I need to see more. Kaboom! Morris Brown College. Let's mask up as a precautionary measure. What are they trying to prevent?
Well, according to Morris Brown, they are trying to prevent an outbreak of 19. We've been hearing reports of this supposed new variant.
It's 23. Shouldn't we be calling it COVID-23?
Yeah, I don't care.
COVID-19 plus 4, or COVID-19 ad infinitum, or put a mask on your face and say hello, and here's your government ID card, and only bend when we say spread. I mean, I can't take it. But anyhow, please.
According to the email, I've got the Gateway Pundit here on the screen, and I'll just read what Dr. Kevin James, who is the president of Morris Brown.
Doctor of what, do we know?
Not sure, but we'll look away from that for now, Dr. Jill. Quote, effective immediately, Morris Brown College has reinstated its COVID-19 mask mandate due to reports of positive cases among students in the Atlanta University Center. And mind you, Norm, this is reports of positive cases. This isn't confirmation of existing cases. But
I mean, do they prescribe SP belts when they have venereal disease on campus? What?
Even if there were confirmed cases, I agree with you. What the hell are they talking about? But let's get to the substance of the policy that they're seeking to enforce. Quote, over the next 14 days, the following protocols will be in place. 1, mask wearing. 2, physical distancing. 3, large gatherings. 4, isolation and quarantine. 5, contact tracing. 6, symptom monitoring. And 7, regular hand wash / sanitization. We prioritize your safety and seek your cooperation in preventing another pandemic.
Is this a residential college or is it a commuter college?
This is a historically black college, an HBCU, and it was originally founded in the late 1800s, I believe 1887, if I'm correct here. Interestingly, this is when I started, kind of around at Morris Brown College, trying to understand why Morris Brown would be on the radar, or be in the position of making headlines. And certainly it seems very tone deaf, although I think all of us can agree that we've seen people in our day-to-day lives that still wear masks while they're driving in the cars like complete dorks, right? Or have an Uber delivery driver with a mask around his chin as he walks your bag to your front porch, or even some Amazon delivery driver doing the same thing. I mean, the public consciousness around this stuff is completely. But what I found, Norm, is this. I'm going to put something else on the screen. This is an article from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution that was published originally December 11th, 2002. And the title is Morris Brown Test. Historic College Loses Its Accreditation. And what this story does is go through the background of how one Morris Brown College out of Atlanta, Georgia, lost its federal accreditation, which, as we previous streams and previous conversation, common knowledge is that federal accreditation of institutions of higher learning is what allows these institutions to seek federally backed student
Yeah,
loans.
so it lost its accreditation for 20 years. Why?
20 years. And I'm scrolling on purpose here because it took scrolling all the way down here to figure out that there was no, first of all, institution at that time was $23 million in debt in 2002, and that it had allegedly stolen at least $5.6 million in federal loans that the school itself received for people who either didn't qualify, who dropped, who never enrolled, etc. So there was major financial malfeasance that contributed to the loss of this institution's status on the I think it was the Negro College Fund's list of schools. They were actually removed from that National Negro College Fund's list of schools.
Mind is a terrible thing to waste.
And the agency that they lost accreditation through is not the same accreditation agency through which they were approved for an application in November of 2020 during the height of the COVID pandemic. So here we have the connection. I also found an article, I'm not going to bring it up right now, but in late June, the school was awarded a major federal grant in to the tune of, I think, $3 million or a little over that. And then here we have them just a couple of months later being a first on behalf of the public health state, as we've talked about on this stream. So I think that those two things are what oscillate in my mind here, is that this institution is on the heels of credibility destroying behavior, but is also right on the heels of just earning back some ability to participate in sort of higher education scam, buying through federally backed student loans. And then they're one of the first institutions in the country to say that they are going to re-implement COVID measures, which by all accounts, we have agreed as an informed citizenry did not do a damn thing to preclude or prevent or mitigate a pandemic.
So we're going to announce a new award here. The Uncle Anthony Award. Loosely associated with the Uncle Tom Award. That is when a black person tries to curry favor with a white person by acting in ways that conform to the white person's expectations. We now have an historical black college drawing from that well, winning the Uncle Anthony Award. What are they doing? They're doing what they think Uncle Anthony Fauci would like in order to pander and curry favor with federal officials. I am not ready for mask mandates. I have my doubts about getting the next vaccine. I guess we're on iteration number 6. And from everything I'm seeing, there's really just not an appetite for another set of lockdowns. You know, kudos to Alex Jones for pointing this out. He claims to have sources in the so-called deep state that suggests there's a plan for a rollout of this in the fall again. And of course, deep conspiracy theorists say this is just another way of habituating us to the sort of behavior that makes it easy to justify counting ballots, aka having another stolen election in 2024. I don't want to go that far. I will if the data takes me there, but we do note, you know, this college. What's the name of the college again?
Morris Brown.
You know, they've decided to be number one in setting a signal. It's time once again to lock down and be here.
So I learned in doing a little diligence on this, and I think that there's a post-millennial article that maybe references this, but Rutgers is another university that effectively, and if you'll put that previous thing back on the screen there, Norm, for me, because I have one parting point for our discussion of higher education before we get to a Bloomberg article. But Rutgers is still one of less than 100 universities nationwide that is requiring the vaccine for admission to its university, and it was one of the first to implement it, and still has that on the books. these sorts of things are just vestiges of a broken system behind a really marred response to what ended up being something that was leveraged for the deprivation of civil liberties, sovereignty all over the country. I've got the question here. What would Ye say? And Norm, I don't expect you to know this, but poet laureate, one formerly known as Kanye West, is famous for a number of things, but in part, he has a song in which he says, "Some people graduate but be still stupid." And that defines a generation of students, in my opinion, in the modern American academy. They tell you, read this, eat this, don't look around, just teach this, Jesus. Okay, look up now, kind of thing, right? Our institutions have absolutely failed in affording students the ability to think critically and teaching them how to think critically, and are instead shoving down their throats and into their brains methodology of what to think, right?
Possibly, and there is a potent line of social theorists who say that's what institutions always do. They enforce conformity and punish deviance. That's in the 1950s and 60s we used to call criminals deviants. Now we call them saints, aka George Floyd. But point well taken. I think that these are signs of the resurgence of the public health state, and the public health state is quite frankly of a piece with the phenomena known as globalism. That is the development of global norms to which we must all cohere in the name of somehow a better world, or and I encourage all of you to read through this, as I am, an open society. This is George Soros, a book that he wrote in 2019. What's at stake in the world is the belief, fed largely by big data, that we can know now, finally, from some centralized basis, what's good for the human race and each and every member of it, and that a state should be empowered to enforce its vision of the public good, or this emerging global consensus on what's good for everyone, regardless of what others think. And thus, when you see the media, the mainstream media, criticizing those who question science or who question experts, the attempt is made to say that if you retain choice, or if you decide you want to choose for yourself whether to do this, that, or the other thing, you're a rube. Whereas if you trusted the science and listened to the expert, you'd be happier. Because, as we keep saying here, you will own nothing, but you will be happy. If you let the state, if you let those who know best control, life will be good. And, I got to thinking about this last night, Mike. Last night we talked about New York City's problem with the influx of migrants. I also spoke to people about, at least my intention, to start reading through the Michael Stokes, Paulson, William Baud textbook on con law, and I did. And it struck me last night that what's really at stake with respect to the immigration crisis is the vision of American society. And it comes about in an awkward way. So, folks, I don't get a royalty for this from the publisher, but, if you want to read along, invest in the book. It's expensive, but it's broken into 84 discrete lessons, as it were. 84 discrete, I don't know what he calls them. I got to double check. 84 discrete assignments. And so I'm going to read through them all, and I think I'd like to talk with you about them. The first, and by the way, shout out to the students at the Western New England College of Law. I heard from one of them last night. They're listeners. They're looking for insights in how to survive the law school experience, and we will give them to you here.
Absolutely. Love hearing that, by the way.
So,
so if we have them listening to this one, to the students that do listen, I understand that this is probably a competitive advantage for you within your class, so you don't necessarily want to share the insights that one Norm Pattis might be able to afford you in being able to hack con law, hack criminal defense, these sorts of things. But because we know that you have friends at other law schools, do share law and legitimacy with study groups with whom you're not competing directly at your institution. Don't be too greedy. We understand to protect some mind share for yourself within your class, but do share with other students at other accredited law schools.
So photography, no, I'm not recommending my new book to non-attorneys, although I am working on a book now. It'll take about a year to finish it. But I am recommending that non-attorneys read constitutional law and follow along here so that they can get some sense of constitutional literacy. Because here's what's at stake. If you think about the one, in the introduction to con law, the question always is, well, what is the Constitution? Where does it come from, and why do we have one? We have a written constitution in the United States, and it's the first of its kind. That is the first time that a written constitution aspired to govern an entire nation. And that constitution set the metes and bounds, set the limits of government power, set what the people can expect of government, set expectations on how government can operate. And it didn't arise in a vacuum. It's not as though a bunch of people got together one day and said, hey, here's this continent. How are we going to govern? They came and they brought expectations from England. And those expectations were reflected in a number of charters. And I'm going to nerd out on them for a moment, but I want, I don't expect all of you. I don't expect all of you necessarily to look these up, although you might find it of interest to do so. But in 1100, the Charter of Liberties in England by King Henry I established that the Norman kings, after the Norman conquest of the Saxons, they came over the Channel from France, from Normandy. I like to talk about it because I'm Norman, and imposed their will on the Anglo-Saxons. But in a limitation on the king's power said that Norman kings could not suspend pre-existing Anglo-Saxon rights. A second you are aware of is Magna Carta, limitations on the king's power to deprive people of life, liberty, or property other than by the established law of the land, a charter from 1215. The observance of the Due Process of Law statute in 1368, which limited the powers of the king's privy court, that is, the courts that were able to do equity on whatever the common law said. And so it placed limitations on the king's court. The Petition of Rights in 1628, which made it possible, which established the notion of parliamentary consent for taxes by the king. The Habeas Corpus Act of 1679, which gave a right to Englishmen to claim that they were being held contrary to the law of the land. The English Bill of Rights, which was established incident to bringing William and Mary of Orange in to replace Charles II, basically putting an end to the 17th century of conflict in 1689, which asserted, among other rights, the right to be tried to a jury, and the right to have representation before taxation, and then the Act of Settlement in 1701, which provided life tenure for English judges. Now you're saying, okay, come on, I'm having a hard time staying awake this morning, and you're putting me to sleep with this recitation of ancient history. No, I'm trying to awaken you to the possibility that what makes the Constitution possible in the United States is centuries, or more than 1,000 years at this point, of legal tradition. And so when the founders of the Republic came to the United States, they were inhabited colonies, which were established by royal charters, contracts between the King of England and people operating the colonies. The colonists began to feel that they had been deprived of the traditional rights of Englishmen, and that is rights that went back centuries. And so they rebelled. And they contended that any people has a right to rebel. We have a right to establish our government. They followed the writings of John Locke, who we've talked about here before. And Locke talks about people retaining their natural right, so to speak. And that's a word he'd use. That's a troublesome concept in modern times. But the right to rebel, to change government as a matter of popular sovereignty. They threw off English power, established through the Declaration of Independence their right to go their own course, fought a 7-year Revolutionary War, and created Articles of Confederation, where the 13 states acted together as 13 sovereigns to try to manage a continent. That entity lacked, that document lacked the power to have a strong central government. For one thing, it required the unanimous consent of all 13 colonies to get anything done. Rhode Island had 1/60th of the population, and they could stop the whole thing and grind it to its knees. After Shays' Rebellion in Western Massachusetts in, I think, 1783, 86 and 87, the federal government realized, wait, we need some more centralized power. And so the colonies, the states rather, authorized a constitutional convention to amend the Articles of Confederation. And what that resulted in was the Constitution that we now are governed by, which was ratified by the states. Only 9 of them had to ratify. And we have been laboring under it since with various amendments and so forth. And so this Constitution is steeped in history. Why do I mention this? And this is the only point, the only takeaway. I don't want to consume a whole lot more time on this today, because we are steeped in history. When we came, my family came to the United States in the 20th century. My father was an illegal immigrant from Greece. My mother's father came from Quebec. He was a logger. I was taught that history as though it were my own. When we naturalize a citizen, they have to pass a citizenship test where they are required to learn certain fundamental pieces of history and recite an understanding of it. Learning history is the process of becoming socialized or made part of a community. And I don't mean socialized and becoming a socialist, but learning a set of common expectations and norms. When we open our borders and say to people, come on down, do whatever you like, and we'll provide a home for you, and we don't require them to socialize, we don't require them to adopt a part of our history as their own, basically we undermine the prospects for legitimacy, and we undermine the possibility of constitutional governance. It is the case that at some law schools at Duke, for example, I'm aware of this because I tutored a young man who has now graduated Duke, they held a mock constitutional convention early in the con law class, and a majority of Duke law students will not swear allegiance to the United States Constitution, because why would the words of dead white men govern or have any authority over them? They want to remake the Constitution themselves. And so in their efforts to learn the law, they look for opportunities to radicalize things, to transform the Constitution into a doctrine detached from its history. When you do that, you make the Constitution noise, sound and fury, signifying nothing. So I would encourage all of you to get that textbook, read the history, read the Federalist Papers. Ask yourself, what were these people up to? And what are my obligations under this document? And what are my rights under this document? The courts are open to all, but what we make of the law is a free-for-all. And what we learn about the law informs how we decide to enforce it. I think we need to insist on constitutional literacy about the Constitution for all Americans, and we'll talk more about that next. I went on a 10-minute.
I love it. It's really important. Can you put the book up again and just say the title out loud, and I can post it in the chat?
Yeah. So again, this is a huge ask, but if you're reading or following this podcast, you're following it in part because we're constitutionalists. So every few years I reread a textbook on constitutional law to get current on thinking of it. This is a book called The Constitution of the United States. The 4 authors, the primary author is Michael Stokes Paulsen, Paulsen. It's almost 1,700 pages. We're going to discuss each of those chapters, not each page, in the course of the next year, so that you understand what it means to say we have a constitution, so that you understand the methods under which the Constitution is read, how it's interpreted, the doctrines that the Constitution requires be enforced through the law of the land, and why we bother with it at all. These are important and fundamental questions, in part because globalism, the notion to assert global norms, the creation, let's say, of a public health state, the yielding of sovereignty of the United States to the World Health Organization such that we follow global norms. These are threats to American constitutionalism. These are ways of saying that the Constitution isn't good enough to govern. There's a better way. But we have called the Constitution the supreme law of the land and the fundamental law of the land in the United States. And it's up for grabs. And that warfare takes place primarily in American law school classrooms, but it also takes place in editorial pages of the United States newspapers and online on social media. I want you to be a constitutional warrior, and so I want you to come back to law and legitimacy so that we can learn what the Constitution is, how to defend it, and how to assert it in all the context of your daily life.
Well, just to illustrate the point that you just made, that this is the battleground is within American law schools. We have this opinion piece that was co-authored by a couple of Ivy League 2Ls that made its debut in Bloomberg Law, I believe, a few days ago, August 18th. And their argument is that law students who matriculate into the practice of law should only apply to law firms that care about climate. And so if there is any better...
I care about climate. Turn the air conditioner up. It's too warm in here.
If there is any better illustration of what Norm just said regarding the crisis of legitimacy in the country, it is this. It is that our institutions that are dedicated exclusively to the instruction of what it requires to pass a bar and practice law and to take into one's hands the best interests, the freedoms, and obligations of its citizens, those that it teaches, and we have students that, by the way, here's one of the co-authors. I'll put, because this is linked in that article, Aiden Bassett. This is what comes up when you click on his profile, right? I'll let people make their own observations, and I'll also share, what his experience is. Georgetown Environmental Law, Media Co-Chair, National Student Leadership Committee for Law Students for Climate Accountability, Mitigation Research Assistant for Georgetown's Climate Center, and then I guess campaigning before certain elections. But by and large, these students that are getting a mouthpiece, and I'll share the other one. Is Jacinia Class, who is, I believe, trilingual, Portuguese, Spanish, and English. And she is at Harvard, not Georgetown. But you'll see roughly the same thing, that the activities and the interests of these law students are primarily geared toward what the mainstream sort of establishment narrative is. And it appears to me, Norm, that it's highly religious without the proper context of faith that we would typically recognize. Law students are arguing by and through this opinion piece that law students should collectivize their interests and only give their labor to firms that make some sort of vague commitment to climate and the environment. I can't understand why the priorities of law students as 2Ls at Ivy League schools like Georgetown and Harvard, and also why they're being given a mouthpiece in Bloomberg's opinion piece on this. There's not some other effort here that's at play, right? Which is the disenfranchisement of what they got in previous streams this week, the 2030 plan, Klaus Schwab, you'll own nothing and you'll be happy kind of thing. This is what we're earning. And we're going to do it to ourselves because it will own educated and practicing attorneys that will be ushering this stuff in by and through the courts as advocates and as judges.
When you first flashed me this piece, my reaction to it was, I think the claim is, don't go to work, for firms that don't prioritize climate things. And I'm thinking, well, good. Then there are fewer applications for me to read. I won't need these idiots. I'm darkening my doorstep. I care about the climate. I care about due process. I care about liberty. I care about equality before the law. I care about a lot of things, and they can go ahead and be climate activists. That's okay. That is a vocation that they can choose. But the notion that they bring to it a sort of religious commitment and an attempt to condemn others who don't share their values reflects the growing spirit of intolerance and of new right or new left authoritarianism that revolves around the public health state.
Well, consider what it means that law firms would be pressured by their employees to make meaningful change in the space of climate. And we know that law firms' primary reason for existence is to advocate for the interests of their clients, wherever they are, however they come to the firm, except there's discretion on what clients to take on. But can we agree, Norm, that there would be some meaningful separation between which types of clients, future attorneys such as Jacinia and Aiden would be willing to take on? And
so yesterday, without revealing a confidence, I took a call yesterday from the sister of a man accused of murder. And, based on what she said, we were evaluating his potential for success on a self-defense claim and his exposure to other charges, such as unlawful possession of a firearm. But here's the question I forgot to ask her on behalf of her brother, who is looking at 60 years in prison. What's his position on climate change? Because let me tell you something, unless he scores well on the climate change questionnaire index, I'm going to let him rot behind bars. Of course, it's Tommy Rot. Hey, Mike, we've got a new listener, at least somebody who I've not heard from before, Imperious, and he's bringing up an author I don't know. Imperious says this is all just part of the subversion process as described by Yuri Bezmenov. Imperious, tell us more about Yuri Bezmenov. It sounds like an author that we're going to have to read.
I don't know if it's as much of an author as it is someone that made the rounds as a former Russian intelligence asset that described in real time. Maybe I'm thinking of the wrong person, but Imperious, if you can just clarify in the chat that if Norm is describing an author or if you are describing a video that has been widely circulating discussing, sort of the revolution that would come from within the U.S. by and through its institutions. I think I'm familiar with exact talking.
Okay, I've heard of that. The revolution we want to foster here, though, is a revolution that is devoted to the concept of individual liberties under the rule of law as embodied in the United States Constitution and protected in the Bill of Rights. That is our revolution and our revolutionary commitment. And we're trying to make each of you into miniature revolutionists or revolutionaries who will stand up for the rights of ordinary people to be significant in their own skins, in their own communities, and to retain the fundamental right to live with one another under the rule of law as freely as circumstances permit.
A couple of things here. Lawyer Will asks, which edition of the textbook do you have there?
Yeah, so I think it's the 4th edition, Will. Lawyer Will, Lawyer Will, Lawyer Will, Lawyer Will, Lawyer Will, because I know you get points in your ongoing competition with Pete for the number of times we mention your name, and I won't mention.
I don't feel like Pete is competing that hard right now. He's letting me down.
Yeah, I know. Constitution of the United States, 4th edition. It's the 2019 edition. It's going to cost you. I think I paid like $250 for it.
Because he sees the 3rd edition from 2017 for less than $3. So that may still be sufficient, Norm.
It may be. I mean, obviously, we're not giving exams here, and we have to decide how to fold that into the format. I gave a brief 10-12 minute discussion of it today. Maybe we need to do one show a week on it. I mean, that's we're a work in progress. We will evolve as circumstances permit. Imperious writes as to Bezmenov, Mike, you were right. A Russian KGB agent that described how and why the destructive process. Of an enemy nation, how to destroy an enemy nation without firing a shot. In addition to Michael Foucault. Okay, we'll talk about Foucault later as well. You kind of butchered that Foucault spelling. It's Foucault. A former KGB agent named Yuri Alexandrovich Bezmenov claimed in 1984 that Russia has a long-term goal of ideologically subverting the United States. Well, if they do, it's working, So, hello, comrades. Let's move on. We never got to Mark Meadows today. That's the story we keep promising to discuss and never do. I wonder why that is. Lots going on in Meadowsville. Meadows filed a motion. Meadow, as you know, is one of the 19 defendants charged by Fannie Willis. Oh, I love the fact that this prosecutor is named Fannie, and I want to know if she has trouble wedging that lard ass of hers through the courthouse doors. But Fannie Williams has charged Trump and 18 others with RICO, being a corrupt organization in Georgia. They all face charges. Meadows' charges appear to arise exclusively from conduct he engaged in while serving as chief of staff to then President Donald Trump. So Meadows has filed a removal petition in the courts asking that his case be removed to federal court because he was a federal official acting in the course and scope of his duties, and under the supremacy clause of the United States Constitution and federal statute, he has a right to have this claim heard in federal court, where it should be dismissed under claims of executive privilege. I believe there's an evidentiary hearing on that on Monday where we'll learn more. But in the interim, he's now filed a motion to block his arrest by Georgia, pending resolution of that motion. And this is a profound, deeply profound federalism issue that resonates back, believe it or not, all the way to 1817, and a famous case called Maryland versus McCulloch, or McCulloch versus Maryland, wherein the following proposition was tested. The United States created a national bank, a highly contested proposition. Was this legitimate under the limited powers of the federal government? Maryland taxed the bank because it was operating within its jurisdiction. The federal government brought an action saying Maryland cannot tax a federal bank. A state cannot tax a federal bank because the federal law is the supreme law of the land, and the power to tax is the power to destroy. And if we give states the power to attack the federal government, what they're going to do is render the federal government impotent. And however limited the federal government's powers are, that it is a real entity, and it's within the scope of its power, it is supreme. And the Supreme Court agreed and said that Maryland could not tax a national bank. A state bank, an inferior power, could not tax a superior power. The principles of McCulloch versus Maryland of 1817, more than 200 years ago, are alive and well in the Meadows case. Because in the Meadows case, here is a presidential advisor, his chief of staff, who's being charged with a crime by a state for activity that he engaged in while he was chief of staff. Now, clearly, he didn't have I don't believe, complete immunity to do whatever he likes. He wasn't like a diplomat visiting the United States, cloaked in diplomatic immunity. If he killed his wife, I presume he could be prosecuted. But if he's acting within the course and scope of his duties as a presidential advisor, does a state get the right to prosecute him criminally any more than a state could prosecute a national bank under McCulloch v. Maryland? And I think the answer is probably no. Related issue, John Eastman. I don't know if he's got a counsel yet, but I've seen his name in opinion pieces, and I've seen him say, look, the prosecution of he as a lawyer for advising Trump on what legitimate moves could and could not be made in efforts to, quote unquote, stop the steal in 2020, he's now being prosecuted. Now, clearly, lawyers can be prosecuted for crimes, and they can be prosecuted if they advise their clients to break the law, and they can be compelled to testify about that advice. That's the crime fraud exception to the attorney-client privilege. But Eastman raises a fundamental point. Are we now going to permit state prosecutors to prosecute people who advise federal officials because we disagree with those federal officials? So we're beginning to see very significant and defining issues arise in the Georgia prosecution, and I welcome it. I think it's a great test of our institutions, of our ideas, and of the law.
To a certain extent, I agree, but I think that it's still, as intellectual or academic of an exercise as it will be from a historical perspective in the moment. I think it is it's important that Mark Meadows and it appears that he is getting very good counsel from where I'm sitting. I love that he is being aggressive. He made the motion to remove several days ago, and then this motion to preclude the arrest. He's getting in front and firing back very quickly. Yeah, no. And we haven't seen any other. And this is perhaps what I think you were hoping to encourage or elicit from Donald Trump's counsel, is to get in the game and start fighting now. Just go on offense. I like this a lot. I do think that perhaps the federalism issue will be missed by many in the legal community. I hope it's not. But I also think that we should expect some of the same sort of deployment of the 14th Amendment from the likes of the state of California. And so we'll see again some of these issues start to come to a head in much the same way.
I don't know where Imperius has come from, but a welcome contributor. This is larger than about how law. This is biological. Can a multiracial nation exist? It never has in history. And when you have 76 million people who don't believe in the nation, can it survive? The issue of race and the issue of changing demographics is a significant one driving polarization in the country. I'd like to believe that we can agree to live together under law with a commitment to common ideals and common character, and that not everything will be reduced to matters of identity. It used to be the case, and we are a nation of immigrants for the most part, unless you were here at the inception, in which case you've been treated as a stranger in your own land. But the point is that wave upon wave of immigrants has come, and they've all made a commitment to something called America. They've all made a commitment to something called Americanism. And we once talked about the United States as a melting pot where each generation of immigrants tried to assimilate to common norms. Somehow within the last 30 or 40 years, that's changed. And we now are a nation of hyphenated Americans. And I think this is Imperius's point, that unless and until we seek to come together under the rule of law to live under common norms, what we're encouraging is division. And if we're going to encourage division, then we can't live together. If one group decides it has a superior claim to others and the others owe it something, this is Vivek Ramaswamy's notion of a nation of victims, then suddenly we become polarized and we disintegrate. If the goal of being an American is to hold open the ideal that each and every person can succeed according to their efforts, we're a nation of underdogs who aspire each to work, each to drive, each to do their very best under existing neutrally applied rules to achieve the best within themselves. A nation of underdogs can accomplish great things. A nation of victims will tear itself to pieces. And I think that's Imperius's point.
And even a nation of underdogs can create incumbents that become a nation of victims. And I believe that is most accurately where we are as Americans right now in 2003, is that we were once a nation of underdogs. We were meritorious and victorious, and we have...
And photography throws out, in its money more than identity.
Of a nation of victims in our moment.
Sorry, Mike, you're cut out. I didn't mean to speak over you.
Yep. And our challenge right now when it comes to legitimacy and what you and I parse on a day-to-day basis, it's a matter of rediscovering and revitalizing that sense of what it means to be the underdog and to do without excuse, to do or to not do, but in any case, without excuse. And my hope and optimism resides in that there's great cause to believe that we'll be able to bring that back into our shared reality. So anyway, Norm, I want to tell everybody how to find us. Obviously, we want you to follow us on X at LawPod Daily. Every day stream is done live broadcast through X. You can also find us on Rumble Video, where many of our live comments come from, and that chat was incredible this morning. Thank you, everybody, for being here. BTL, Jackson Barrett, T-Girl in the Cloud, Freedom Lover. We had Lawyer Will, of course, and I think a few more, but that was very live this morning. High Society was there early. And then over on YouTube, YouTube continues to be Norm. Our subscribers over there are increasing by the day, and some of the videos that we've done in recent days, Friday, Mondays in particular, have garnered a lot of engagement in the comments and in the likes. So big thing for us is when you're here, please, just as a matter of habit, like the video, and if you're moved by it, share it. And if you're a law student, please don't compete with those around you. You keep us from your peers, but don't keep us from your friends at other institutions. We do want law and legitimacy to become part of your unofficial curriculum as you make it through your doctrinal courses. You can also find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, Overcast, wherever you find podcasts. But you know what my saying is. Leave us 5 stars and or a positive review, or just leave us alone over there. Norm, we'll be watching the debates tonight, I'm assuming.
Oh, gosh, I forgot all about them. We forgot to mention them. Republican debates tonight. I don't know if I can do it. 45-second limit on what can be said. Holy cow. Why don't we just put a muzzle on Vivek and say, smart people need not apply? But let's watch, or at least let's read about it, and let's talk about it tomorrow morning.
Do the Harvard admission standards. I'm just kidding.
Welcome, come on back to Law and Legitimacy. The next American Revolution starts here.
See you tomorrow, Norm.